Are you unsure about how to care for your plant over winter? In this video I'm going to run through some winter plant care tips, some common mistakes and how to avoid them, and how to keep your plants healthy until the spring when they'll be actively growing again. So we'll start with perhaps one of the most problematic plant care issues over winter, which is actually overwatering. So we can get into a routine of how often we water our plants and how much we give them. However, during the winter, plants actually go dormant and slow their active growth down, so they don't need as much water. But if we're in that routine of giving them the usual amount we usually do at the same regularity, then it can often sit in the soil and the soil become waterlogged or damp for long periods of time, which can then cause issues with the plant, such as root rot or even fungal issues if the soil is damp for a long time. So the best thing to do is wait until the top of the soil is dry before watering, and when you do water, maybe don't give as much water as you usually would, and then that should avoid those problems. And then when we get back into springtime, you can increase your watering back to usual levels and you should start to see active growth in the plant again. So the next one is similar to the point about watering, particularly if you use a water-soluble fertilizer, and it's actually to stop fertilizing over the winter period. As I've said, plants become dormant and slow their active growth during the winter period, so they don't actually need fertilizer because they won't use it. The risk of continuing to add fertilizer is that it could be taken up by the plant, and if it's not being used it can cause issues like fertilizer burn and damage to the plant. Equally, if you are continuing to water and fertilise, it might trick the plant to think that it should still be actively growing, but any growth that you get will be likely leggy or weak, and it won't be the strongest of plants when it does come to the springtime. So reduce fertilising until you come to a complete stop, don't fertilise over the winter period, and then continue to fertilise or start to fertilise again in the spring just as you start to increase your watering again, and then that should promote healthy new growth in the springtime. So I'm going to try and change the plant for each of these video sections, and this one is very fitting for this section, which is light. So this is a low light tolerant plant, and of course in winter the days get shorter, so we have less natural light for our plants. It's a good idea if you can to move your plants around into brighter spots where they can get more light throughout the day, so even though they are dormant or not actively growing, they will still benefit from that light to stay healthy and strong until spring returns and they can start actively growing again. With moving your plants around, of course, that is based on practicality, depending on how many plants you've got and what space you've got available, depending on where the bright spots in your home are over the winter period. You can look at things like grow lights to use to top up light for your plants. Just do your research to make sure you're getting ones that are actually effective and will give your plants what they need. And also on that note, don't overuse them either. Use them as a top-up, but not to replicate summer or spring conditions, as you really want the plant to continue following its natural cycle where it reduces its active growing so that it can effectively rest and start its cycle again in the spring with strong new growth. So this next section leads really well on from lighting, and that is temperature. So if you're actually looking for brighter spots for your plants, you might be tempted to put them closer to the window or even on a windowsill or window ledge. However, they can become incredibly cold during the winter period, and that general area can become quite drafty depending on how old your house is and how well it's built. So things like succulents, like I've got here, a burrows towel, can do fairly well on a windowsill during the spring and summer because they can tolerate high heat and direct sun. However, if you're moving other plants there to try and get that extra light through the day, you might actually want to keep them a little bit further back, find the right balance of sort of distance and light so that your plants can stay warm or within a reasonable temperature that is suitable for them. Houseplants generally are from subtropical or tropical regions, so they like higher temperatures. Usually within houses, I'd say average 15 degrees upwards, and over winter we might have the heating on too. So they should be quite happy within the house, just like I said, not too close to the window. And if you do have any plants that usually reside on the window, remember to move them off the windowsill where it's going to become cold so that they don't freeze during the day or the night, and keep them happy. So move those back a little bit, and just like your other plants, find the right balance of light and temperature for them. So the second point to make on temperature is actually heat, and during the winter period we'll likely put our radiators on more, or whatever sort of heaters we've got, to keep our homes warm. During the spring and summer months we might not use them as much, so we might actually put plants around our homes and not really think about where they are in relation to those heat sources. So when we do start to put them on in the winter, it's really important, do a little plant check around your home, just make sure that any plants that you've got aren't too close to those heat sources so they're not going to get burnt or crispy leaves over any time that they've spent sort of within that vicinity. So that leads perfectly onto the next section, which is humidity. So I've kept the same plant as this is a perfect example of how humidity can affect plants if it's not high enough. This is a Stenonthelubsiana, part of the Maranthaceae family, and related to Calatheas, which are notorious for leaf crisping if they don't have the right humidity. This has a little bit of crisping on the leaves, if you can see that there, but that is mainly from effects of lower humidity over the spring and summer period. But during the winter, the humidity in our homes can actually reduce further because we'll have our radiators or other heat sources on, so the air becomes drier. So if you do have any plants that like high humidity or are susceptible to leaf crisping, for example, you might want to try things like a humidifier to raise the humidity levels, or you could try grouping plants together that like high humidity to try and create more localized high humidity levels. But generally just keep an eye on them and try and minimize any ill effects of dry air where the leaves might become crispy, and try and keep them as lush and healthy as possible. So the next one is propagation, and over the winter period, as I mentioned, plants slow their active growth and go dormant. So your chances of successful propagation reduce, as if you've taken any cuttings, plants are less likely to produce roots and new growth for that reason. It's best to wait until spring when plants start actively growing again, and then you'll increase your chances of propagation success. What I would say with that though is if you happen to accidentally damage any of your plants, whether that's knocking leaves off, stems off, or if you have to prune it for any reason, I would always personally try propagating it anyway, regardless of the chance of success, just so that it's potentially not going to waste if it does happen to be successful. But then if it isn't successful, nothing lost, and it'll still go in the bin or in the compost as it would have done if I'd have just put it there in the first place. So I'd always try it if it was an accidental sort of cutting or piece of the plant, but I wouldn't actively try propagating my plants over the winter period. I'd wait until spring and hopefully increase my chances of successful propagation then. So this is a cutting that I had from late summer, and this is an Epipremnum amplissimum. As you can see, it's got a really good strong root system on there on both pieces of the stem and some new leaves there. So what I'll do, I'll pop this up imminently and it'll be dormant over the winter period, and then we'll hopefully see strong new growth in the spring and hopefully some really good new plants to the collection. So it is worth noting that with the lower light levels and plants not actively growing, sometimes plants can look a little bit sad during the winter period, even lose leaves without showing any signs of growing new ones. Don't worry too much about that, hopefully they will recover in the springtime when they start to grow again. Just care for them, following the tips in this video, and again, if you've got any tips yourself, please do share them in the comments below so that other viewers can benefit from them. If you found those tips useful, and if you happen to have any Caladiums, we've got a video especially on Caladiums, winter care and preparing bulbs for dormancy and to bring them back for the spring. So if you do have a Caladium and you're not aware, if it is looking a little bit sad, don't worry, it's not dying, it's just going dormant. So check that video out next if you need to, and you can bring your Caladium back next year, hopefully happier and healthier than this year. If you've got any questions, put them in the comments below and we'll respond to everyone. And as always, thank you for watching Grow Your Wellbeing.